It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160 and 101.1 FM. And our conversation with Joe Yogerst is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. He's been on the road for a lot of years, and that makes him the natural choice to do this book from National Geographic. It's another of our National Geographic books, 100 Drives, 5,000 Ideas. Let's say hello to Joe Yogerst. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Todd. How you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful, and especially with this. Now, you've done books along these lines before, 50 States, 5,000 Ideas, and 100 Parks, all of those different things. This one just seems like so much fun to compile, though. Was it as much fun to put together as it was to read? I know it was a lot of work.
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because you take the drives and then you come home, and when you sit down to write it, in your mind, it's like taking the drives again.
Oh.
And all of these wonderful images come to mind as you're writing, and that's not necessarily always the case. But here, because I'm following a map on the screen as I'm writing, or if I'm following a paper map, it's really like taking the journey over again.
Well, see, that's an interesting thing to me, because as I'm reading, I'm thinking, now, did Joe go on all of these? I know it takes a team to put it together, but how many of these did you actually go on?
I've been on most of them. I haven't been necessarily on the ones in northern Canada.
Uh-huh.
I had a year to do this book, and I couldn't go everywhere. And because these books sell so well in Canada, we had to have so many Canadian drives. So we have 14 Canadian drives and 86 American U.S. drives. And so I couldn't do all of the ones in Canada, but I'd still like to get out and do them. But the American drives, I've done either them in whole or a good part of them over the course of my life, on family trips, college trips, other assignments for National Geographic, things like that. And then, of course, a lot of the ones I had to fill in over the past, in the year leading up to this, taking drives around the country just to make sure that I did them and knew what I was doing.
You know, the interesting thing is, just did the interview with the guy talking about the baseball. It's a baseball card book, and opening in the pack of baseball cards, you immediately turn and sort through them to find your favorite ball players or your favorite team's ball players. I found myself doing that with this book, opening up your book and going, all right, tell me where the Pennsylvania ones are. There's the Ohio River route. There's the travel across hallowed ground route, and they're wonderful, wonderful reads of trips that I've taken. But then you expand it, and you're right. I mean, you go all over these wonderful trips that you describe here, and they all fascinate when you read into them.
Oh, thanks. Pennsylvania, actually, I think is one of the states that has the most drives. I think there's 10 altogether that cross Pennsylvania, which has always been kind of a crossroads anyways. But I counted them up. I didn't realize until this morning how many there actually are there, but there's 10. And they cover most of the state, a large part of it.
Yeah. I love the Ohio River route. It begins in Pittsburgh, right at the point, and it basically follows a route of a trip we took a couple of years ago. You end up down in Louisville, Kentucky. You go to Churchill Downs and the Louisville Slugger Museum, and you're in Cincinnati, and that's just a wonderful drive. But as we think about all of these that you describe in this book, I'm sure that there were some that stood out to you, maybe a few that even surprised you by what you found along the way.
There were quite a few that surprised me, actually. I kind of wanted to dig deeper and do things that weren't so obvious. You have to have things like Route 66 and California Highway 1 in there. And there's a lot of historical ones, the Oregon Trail, Lewis and Clark, things like that. The Revolutionary Road and the Civil War Drive and things. But I wanted to really, both literally and figuratively go a mile farther than other books that deal with road trips and think of things that hadn't been done before. And in my research, I discovered this thing called the Auto Trail. Mm-hmm. They started before World War I, so around 100 years ago. And this is before any of our highways were numbered. And they were done by local auto associations, kind of the forerunner of the AAA, that wanted to encourage people to travel by car, even though they had not really been around that long, and the first road trip across America was 1903. So within 10 years, people all across the country were trying to think up ways of getting people to jump in their car and go on vacation. And they invented these auto routes, auto trails. Route 66 is the most famous of them, but there's a lot of obscure ones, and a number of them, two of them actually feature in Pennsylvania in the book. There's the Lakes to Sea Highway, which was an auto trail established before World War I between Erie, Pennsylvania, and Atlantic City, New Jersey, that goes right across the middle of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to get people to go either to the lake or the seashore for their vacations in their car. And there was another one called the Susquehanna Trail that goes up the Susquehanna Valley between Chesapeake Bay and upstate New York, right across Pennsylvania, going the other way. And so I just found the whole idea of these auto trails fascinating because I'd never heard of them before.
Uh-huh.
So that was one way to get kind of unusual things in the book. The other was to think up things that didn't already exist. So I have an alien highway that goes from Marfa in West Texas to Rachel in southern Nevada, stopping at famous UFO and alien sites along the way in New Mexico and Arizona. And I have a Jurassic Drive from Alberta, Canada to Denver, Colorado that stops at famous dinosaur museums and dinosaur digs. So National Geographic kind of let me, let my imagination run wild with thinking up some of the drives in this book.
Just a few minutes left with Joe Yogerst this morning. The book is 100 Drives, 5,000 Ideas, where to go, when to go, what to do, what to see. You also give us some really important driving tips. What to eat is a big part of this book as well. Talk about how you organize the book. There are, 8 sections in it, aren't there? There's 8 sections, and 7 of them are regional. There's one that's basically called pan-regional because it's for the routes that go through more than one area, like the Dixie Highway from Chicago to Miami, which is another one of the famous auto trails from the 1920s. And Route 66 is obviously a pan-regional road because it's from Chicago all the way to Los Angeles. But the rest of them are regional. One of them is Canada. Another one that people might find unusual is tropical, which is Tropical America, which is drives you can take in Hawaii, southern Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So it's basically arranged geographically. Yeah. One of the interesting things to me about it is how attracted I was to the desert routes. I really enjoy the Arizonas, those sorts of those dry desert trails, and they're just wonderful to me. Those are the ones that intrigue me the most. A great portion of your book is, of course, it's a National Geographic book, so you know you're going to find wonderful photography. Mm-hmm. I'd like to take credit for all that photography, but I can't take credit for a single one. That's 130 years of people taking photographs for National Geographic and an archive that has millions of shots in them now. So I have to thank all of the photographers that contributed photos to this book. Every single word is mine, but those photographs are from all those hundreds of photographers that have shot for them over the years. This is going to be a book that a lot of people, they keep it with them in their cars or help to plan out their vacations wherever they might happen to go. Joe, if you have to tell someone 1 or 2 rides that maybe nobody ever thinks of but would be really cool to take, what would they be? Wow. Oh, boy, that's a good one. If it's the middle of winter and you feel like escaping the snow and the rain and the wind, I would say go to the Virgin Islands and rent a car and drive around St. John's, which is partially a national park and a great tropical island. I have a circumnavigation that's a road trip around the coast of Puerto Rico that's really nice. And I have 3 different drives in Hawaii, which, again, doesn't seem like an obvious place to take a road trip. But some of those islands, like the Big Island, is definitely big enough for a multi-day road trip. Down the Kona coast, around the southernmost point of the United States, up the eastern side of the island where Volcanoes National Park is, through Hilo, and then across through the cowboy country on the north end of the Big Island back to the Kona coast. So I think those are the ones that are maybe not so obvious because people think, we're going to fly to a tropical island and sit on a beach, but you can rent a car in these places, and there's some very cool drives. Yeah, it's just terrific. It doesn't matter where you go. For instance, I'm just leafing through the book looking at the Sports Hall of Fame track from Ohio to Rhode Island, and that's a really interesting trip to me as well because we're all big sports fans around these parts. Yes. It's just a terrific read. You've been doing this for a lot of years. Joe Yogerst. The book is 100 Drives, 5,000 Ideas. Where can people learn more about it, Joe?
Well, I have a website. It's www.joeyogerst.com. I have author pages on Amazon Books and Goodreads. There's always the National Geographic Books website. And that's probably the best way to learn about me.
Terrific.
And learn more about this book.
Terrific stuff. Joe Yogerst, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.